Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Trusted Trustee podcast. And we're picking it up again. We've had a bit of a lull, but we're back on track now. And we're going to talk some really relevant things to do with the SMSF sector as usual. And I'm joined, of course, by Tracey Besters in the Southern Highlands. How are you, Tracey? It's great to see you as usual.
Thank you so much, Darin. It's really nice to be back with you. And thank you so much for everyone's patience over the last couple of months while we took a bit of a break. So I'm doing really well. Thank you.
Yeah, and this, of course, this podcast is brought to you by Superfund Property Valuations. Streamline your SMSF valuations to get compliance without complexity. Superfund Property Valuations is the fast, fixed price, audit-ready solution for busy accountants and trustees. No long waits, no surprise fees, no complicated ordering. Order in 2 minutes on their online form today with the details you can see on the screen now. And I do know I keep saying this, but the period of change that we're going through at the moment, which, and I hate using this word because we've heard it banded around so much, is unprecedented, but this really is a magnitude of change in the superannuation system that I've never seen occur all at once. And unfortunately, with the budget outside of superannuation, that's going to affect valuations as well. So not only are super fund property valuations going to have a very valuable service, obviously, for self-managed super funds, but that whole property valuation and asset valuation sector, really in general, is going to have a lot of demand, I think, leading up to the 30th of June 2027. So I suppose the best thing is seek out these guys to get your property valuation. But again, don't leave it to the last minute because everybody might be going at a rush towards that date. So there could be some capacity constraints there. So just keep that in mind. But it's going to be a big topic, and that's probably not a bad segue to what we're going to talk about
Perfect.
today. I know that it's kind of funny. I know that the federal budget was handed down in May this year, which was several months ago now, but obviously with some horse trading and maybe some unintended consequences that, as usual, the government didn't think about when they handed down the budget papers, there has been quite a bit of change. And just a funny segue, Tracey, I do another podcast for the advisor audience, and we
Yes.
basically had to scrap the
Oh,
podcast that we did for the budget and redo it because there were so many changes that by the time we were publishing it, a lot of the stuff that we
yeah.
discussed had moved. So that's actually a good illustration of how difficult this period is for
Mm,
trustees and practitioners out there in the industry because it is literally such a movable feast. And that doesn't help anybody because, like I always say, human beings are creatures of habit, and the one thing they do like is certainty. And when
yeah.
there's a lot of uncertainty, that's when we get issues. That's when we get problems. That's when we get fear and loathing. And we don't want any of those elements. But anyway, we're going to discuss some of the issues with the budget.
Yeah,
And I
sure.
suppose with the most recent thing, and this isn't going to affect everybody, but we thought it was interesting because this kind of came out of the blue. I mentioned horse trading. Well, the horse trading the government did with the Greens.
Yeah.
They scrapped limited recourse borrowing arrangements that can be used to purchase residential property. Now, they've thrown up all sorts of excuses as to why they did it, one being that this is going to potentially be a solution to the housing crisis, particularly for younger Australians. I haven't been able to join all those dots to figure out how that exactly is
No.
going to work, but we do know that LRBA is being used for residential property, have been banned from the 10th of August this year. But Tracy, it's really revolving around one definition, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, Darren. And, I guess we probably shouldn't have been too surprised about that little kind of, 11th hour thing that came through, really, because the Greens have been wanting to get rid of borrowing in super for so long. And they finally found their opportunity and made it happen, more or less, right? So, but there's a lot of misinformation I'm still seeing. And, we're post that change now. We're after the 10th of August. So, what does it look like moving forward? There's still quite a bit of misinformation, and really it does come down to a definition. So it's not an outright ban on borrowing in super. It's a ban on borrowing in super for non-business real property. So that is the definition change. So when you hear about the fact that commercial property is okay, residential property isn't okay, that is generalization, but that is not the exact change that was made from the 10th of August onwards.
Yeah, just filling in some of the background around that. When the ban was announced, there was a lot of uncertainty over, say, real estate, such as a doctor's practice, which
Yeah.
often is a house, and they
Yep.
use the house as where they actually locate their practice. You go in for a consult, you're going actually to the house. I think a lot of architectural firms might use a townhouse. I know advertising agencies do that, use a
Mhm.
townhouse. So that's
Mhm.
effectively a residential property structure, but they're
Yes.
actually using it for commercial reasons. And there was a little bit of confusion around, well, what does that mean for that now? But
Yeah.
that goes behind the whole. That's why they've defined unless it's business real property. So that covers all of that. So hopefully
Yeah.
they've taken some of that confusion away.
Well, I think it might have taken some away, Darren, and then of course I think it's added more because because we have to go back to that, that old definition and the definition of what is business real property. And you and I have spoken on the podcast before about the definition of business real property and what does that actually mean. And just to revisit that briefly, business real property is real property that's used wholly and exclusively in one or more businesses. So, vacant land probably wouldn't be able to get across the definition of business real property, even though it might be commercial. A doctor's surgery that's in a residence, provided it's wholly and exclusively used in that doctor's surgery or that doctor's business, yes, that probably will be okay. A doctor's surgery that had an element of an Airbnb is probably not okay because as soon as you've got Airbnb coming into the mix, if that's your passive kind of thing that you do an Airbnb, then it probably wouldn't meet the definition of being used in one or more businesses. So there's a lot of now kind of toing and froing and really digging into, well, what does the property do? What is the property? Rather than just, is it residential or is it commercial? Does it have, maybe it's got like, a retail shop downstairs and it's got a residence upstairs. Well, that wouldn't be business real property because the upstairs portion, unless it is insignificant, then or trivial, then that probably wouldn't meet the definition of business real property. So I've just even in the last couple of weeks, Darren, found myself going back through the 2009 ruling around what constitutes business real property, and going through those examples again, just to see where we sit in the current day.
No, it's a really interesting point you raised there because I know that in a lot of discussions, again, since this ban was announced, that people have been playing out scenarios about what does
Yeah.
it mean for this, what does it mean for that. Like you're saying, retail underneath, residential above, what does it mean for
Mm.
this? One of the things that people were discussing was, well, what does it mean if you're actually in a property development business, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
so you're actually you're actually developing and selling residential properties, but
Yeah.
it's within a commercial business. That doesn't fly.
Yeah.
Is basically the answer. It doesn't fly. But we've had all these sorts of questions
Yeah.
being raised in whatever forums that you're talking about. The other
Mm.
thing also is, the question is raised, oh, what if I'm using it as a doctor's surgery now, but at some point in time the doctors move out and it becomes a residential property? Is the LRBA still valid then? Again,
Yeah.
the answer is no. It's got
Yeah.
to be,
The AT,
it's got,
yeah,
I
the
believe
ATO
it's
came
got,
out. Mhm.
yeah, it's got to be the used for commercial purposes for the entire term of the loan.
Correct. That's
It
right.
can't be reclassified as anything else. So,
Yes, and that was another interesting one, right? Because there was a lot of debate going on in the advisor space about that. What if it's at the time of at the time of the acquisition, at the time of the borrowing, it is business real property, but something changes. Well, the ATO like literally came out and said, no, it has to be business real property. They did say, however, and this is interesting, they did say that that if it's vacant for a period, but you're active in finding or looking or searching for a tenant, then it won't lose its definition of business real property. Now they haven't given us any guidelines as to timeframes around the vacancy. So I would doubt that we could, just say, oh, it was business real property today when I purchased it, but it's been vacant for all of this time, but it's still business real property. Like we wouldn't be able to have open-ended things. And of course,
no.
as a trustee of the SMSF, you wouldn't be doing yourself any favours if you left a property vacant with an LRBA in place, given what the interest rates are on LRBAs. So the ATO have given some certainty around the fact that it has to be business real property. It's got to meet that definition the whole way through. Once the borrowing's finished, though, one would suspect that you wouldn't have to meet that definition of business real property any longer.
No, I think that's pretty interesting. I mean, I don't know. I'm not within the four walls of the ATO, but I'd almost suspect that they might think that we don't necessarily need to give a definition of what that acceptable time period is, because they would think that logically the trustee would be in a hurry to find another tenant to actually service the loan. So
Yeah.
they might actually feel that giving a defined time frame might be a little bit redundant, because it's actually in the trustee's interest to get on their skates and get another tenant in there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Darin. And I just think the scenario that you mentioned is the one to be careful of, where it is a residential premises, it's zoned residentially, like a terrace house or a property where there is some sort of professional services, medical services going on. It could easily be converted back into a residence. Those are the ones just to be really careful of, because if it is a doctor's surgery today or it's used in a business today, over that period of borrowing for that 15, 20, 25 years, 30 years, whatever your borrowing is, you won't be able to convert it back into a residence. So obviously, unless the rules change, but the way the rules are written currently, that's what we're stuck with. So just be really careful in those situations, because the only way that you could actually utilize that premises for anything else, if you can't rent it out to a business, would be to sell it and actually liquidate that asset to be able to do something else with those funds.
Yeah, just in that discussion alone, viewers and listeners will be able to determine that whenever an announcement's made, it's about as clear as mud,
Yep.
and all these scenarios are put up, and they have to be answered as to define some or provide some clarity over how you actually move into the future on these things. And of
Yeah.
course, it was a very short time frame on this one, because from the announcement, it was a deadline of the 10th of August where the ban would take effect. Obviously, we're past that now. We're
Yep.
8 days past that now. So a lot of people were actually scrambling to get their
So many.
arrangements in place, and it was actually a bit of a nightmare. And I know that I said at the start, it's LRBAs aren't being used for everybody, but in my journeys, the anecdotal evidence that I got was that there was actually a bit of a rush for it before the end of the 10th of August. I don't know whether or not it's one of those human things where the minute you know it's going to be banned, it's like,
FOMO.
oh, yeah, I've got to quickly do it. I
Yeah.
mean, human nature does sometimes dictate that people do behave like that.
I do know that I was inundated with queries in the couple of
Mm.
weeks prior to that 10th of August
There you
ban,
go.
Darren, just in terms of can I do this and can I do that? And if it's structured this way, and what does that look like? And what if it falls over? And what's my plan B? And so yes, it was very much a rush on. And I think I was reading that they feel like the SMSF borrowing kind of just propped up the investor borrowing mortgage market just for that last little bit, because they were expecting to see the stats on investor borrowing slump a little bit more than what they actually did. So the next few weeks, I think, will be telling, and hopefully everyone who did jump into that kind of SMSF borrowing at the last minute, hopefully all of their ducks were lined up and, their deals actually settle successfully and don't cause any other issues because, when you're rushing things at the 11th hour, sometimes things can go wrong. So hopefully that doesn't happen.
Yeah, yeah. Fingers crossed it won't happen. Now, there is a slight adjunct to this discussion before we move on. I could talk
Yeah,
about this all day. I
we
haven't
could.
even got into the politics of it, and don't get me started on that. But there is a bit of an adjunct. The
Yeah.
SMSF Association, with a number of other housing industry bodies, are actually lobbying the government to see if there can be a carve out for new builds.
Mm,
We don't know. Those discussions are continuing, and I suppose in some ways it would make sense if it meant that the measure was a little bit more fit for purpose, because obviously if you can
mhm.
fund new builds, doesn't that mean that it will be actually increasing supply, which is obviously the issue
Yes.
in the housing market. Now, I've heard different stories about how successful people think that that bit of lobbying is going to be, but nevertheless, it continues.
Yeah.
I've actually run a couple of articles about that this week already,
Yes.
about those lobbying processes. So just watch this space. This argument may not be finished yet, and of course, we will keep you posted as to which direction it actually ends up heading in when the dust finally settles. But we must move on because there's a couple of other
Sure.
things we want to talk about. I
Yeah.
suppose
Yeah.
one of the more contentious things about the budget, and one thing that had a lot of people worried about, was that tax on discretionary trusts, Tracey.
Yeah.
And of course,
Yeah.
at the time, it was flagged that, you know, did the government think about this? And one of the main things was it had an effect on testamentary trusts,
Yes.
which, not just for tax purposes, a lot of people actually use them for estate planning purposes
Mhm.
deliberately to try
Yes.
and address certain issues that whoever the member who has put their will in place has got worries about with some of their family members, and that
Yes.
may be with reckless spending or something like that, a rogue spouse, anything you want to talk about as far as that goes. There are good reasons to use a testamentary trust, and unlike Jim Chalmers will tell you, they are not all motivated by paying less tax. But there
No,
has been a
definitely.
change there now, because the light bulb moment went up when everybody
Yeah.
was saying, hey, hang on, what about this? Government's changed their position a little bit.
Yeah, they have, Darren. And, there was this whole kind of, concern about this concept of a death tax, and as soon as that kind
Yep.
of starts raising its head, then everyone goes, oh, no, we don't want a death tax. We don't agree with death tax. And I guess that's kind of where this was going, that if you taxed if you've now got the budget came out and said if you've got a discretionary trust distribution, then it's going to be minimum 30% tax because we don't want anyone paying less than 30% tax if you've got a distribution from a discretionary trust. Um, so then it was kind of like, well, does a testamentary trust, given that it has got an element of discretion in it, does that then fall into the discretionary trust piece? And initially it kind of was, well, yeah, actually we think it does. And now it's been confirmed that no, it doesn't. It's been excluded from that 30% minimum. So testamentary trusts operate as normal. Now, how does that link back to super? Well, you can actually have a super proceeds trust where you actually have a death benefit that goes into like a testamentary trust called a super proceeds trust. And that is effectively a testamentary trust. So it does kind of tie back into that. But it's interesting, Darin, because I have also fielded a few questions in the last since budget in the last couple of months around, well, why don't I just now, okay, I've got 30% minimum discretionary trust tax. Why don't I distribute it to my super fund? Because my super fund only pays 15%. So why
Mhm.
don't I do that? And I just have to say to everyone, unfortunately, the government may have thought about that earlier than the budget
Yeah.
because a distribution from a discretionary trust into a self-managed super fund is actually not taxed at 15%. It's taxed at 45% under the non-arm's length income provisions. So you cannot, well, you can distribute from a discretionary trust to a super fund, but you'd be paying 45 cents in the dollar. And there's another catch, Darin, because if you do that, then it actually counts towards the concession or contribution caps. So if you go over those caps, you may actually end up with excess contributions as well. And it's likely that you may also land yourself in Div 293 territory. So that kind of, 30% tax is looking pretty positive when you start looking at 45% plus probably, 15% on the contribution side, plus, plus, you're looking at 60% plus. So I have fielded that question a couple of times in the last few months as well.
Oh, I actually love this. If there's one thing that you can count on the government doing, they never put these measures in with an underestimation of how much they can catch, right? They always cast them as wide as they possibly can, and then they wait for objections to come to say that, well, hang on a minute. Like, does that mean that it captures this, it captures that? And then they
Mm,
readjust their positions and say that, oh no, we didn't mean it to do that. So now we're going to carve this out. But the initial thing is, yeah, let's just catch everything, which is why
yeah,
when you talk about these scenarios, they've the one thing they do identify is any sort of loopholes that might exist to say that, oh, hang on, there's a bit of an out there. Most of
yeah,
those are covered off.
yeah.
That part of their job they do pretty well, but
Yeah. Look,
again,
it would have been it would have been really, really disappointing, or I guess disappointing is the best word I can say on air. It would have been really disappointing if there was that 30% minimum on a testamentary trust. I think that would have been really unfair. Because I think, there's a lot of unfairness in some of these measures, is my personal view. But to have that on a testamentary trust with an estate planning situation, I think, yeah, that would have been disastrous for a lot of families.
and of course, we're not just talking about superannuation
Not
here.
at all.
We're
Not at all.
talking about a broad use of testamentary trusts, not
Yeah.
just the SMSF will or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And that would have required a lot of rearrangement of certain structures that people had put into place,
Yeah.
prudently, I might add,
Hmm.
uh, with this in mind, again, with asset protection in mind in a lot of ways when
Hmm.
the person dies and that sort of thing. There is one overriding factor or caveat if you want to put, and again, it comes down to, I know, Tracey, you were talking about definitions before about business real property, and 9 times out of 10, it all comes down to a definition, right? Now you apply it. The the carve out for testamentary trusts comes with a definition to say that it won't apply to testamentary trusts as long as they're being used, and this is not a direct quote, but it's along the
Hmm.
lines of legitimate estate planning
Planning reason.
purposes. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, we haven't had a definition of what legitimate estate planning purposes is. So we're still kind of waiting for that detail. But
Correct.
that is a carve out they've put on it to say that well, it's not just a free for all. It's
No.
it's got to be for estate planning purposes. So
Yeah,
we'll
absolutely.
have to wait and see what that means.
Yeah, and wait for another LCR or another PCG to be able to come through. You're right. And this is why it's complicated. And, this is when I've been speaking to trustees over the last few months about these changes and how it impacts them and trying to, reassure them and, reassure our listeners and, give some sort of, guidance. And it becomes really difficult to do that. You said that at the beginning. It's uncertain times and unprecedented times because we have been hit with all of these changes at the same point. And it kind of takes me back to 2017, that budget, 2016 budget
Yeah.
with Better Simple Super. We were kind of whacked in the face with all of those changes in the one go as well. So it's kind of like we're 10 years down the track, let's do it again. And we know how much that really changed the industry as well. And that changed the superannuation funds balances and limits. And, not that that was all bad, but it was a lot of change at one point in time. So here we are again.
Well, that had to be one of the most ironic labelings ever, simply super. I mean, anybody listening to these podcasts, and we've only been doing it for a shortish period of time, certainly not over the last decade
No.
of changes that have happened. We, we can guarantee you one thing: none of these changes make super any simpler.
They do
It's
not.
all more complex. So calling them simpler super changes or the bill simpler super, uh,
Yeah.
the biggest irony ever. Not
So
that some of those
ironic.
measures were bad. Well done, Peter Costello, to some of them, but
Yeah,
the title of it probably wasn't that accurate. Now,
definitely.
speaking of superannuation being really good,
Mm.
some of the other budget changes has actually had an impact on,
Mm.
you know, the the relative merits of actually having your money inside a super rather than outside of super. One of those was the change to the capital gains tax rules, right?
Yes.
And obviously the scrapping of the 50% discount.
Yeah.
Now, that does favour superannuation structures, doesn't it, Trace?
Yeah, and this is the irony, I guess, if you wanted to use that term again, Darren, because we had Div 296 come in, Div 296 changes, which is no, if you've got more than 3 mil in super, you're in this net, and you've got this additional amount of tax. And then we had, on the other hand, the budget changes that came in or were announced. And that kind of changed the capital gains tax treatment, but that capital gains tax treatment doesn't apply to superannuation. So a super fund, although it didn't receive 50% discount, it received a 33 and a third discount. And that still remains. So superannuation funds are still able to apply that 1/3 discount, provided the asset's been held for longer than 12 months. And we're not limited in the superannuation space, at least back to that indexation side of things. Now, that's been interesting from doing calculations and modeling and all sorts of things around Div 296 purposes, because provided you have a effective tax rate inside of the superannuation fund of less than 30%, if you're looking at what you would do with your money if it wasn't in super, then you're probably still, from a tax perspective alone, and not looking at everything else, you're probably still better off having the money inside of super, because you get the discounts, the capital gains discount, plus you're not limited to that 30%. So yeah, it's been interesting to have both of those things play out, Darren, side by side, and looking at the modelling around it at least.
Yeah, I suppose again it simplifies it a little bit, doesn't it? Because it takes some of the heat out of, and this
Mm,
isn't going to be across the board, obviously. There's going to be some individual circumstances that you're going to have to take into account if you're a trustee, but
mm,
it kind of broadly generalizes that if you just look at things on face value,
yeah.
it's probably better now to keep your money inside of super. So all of that speculation, as you say, Tracy, all of that modeling around, compare whether or not I should hold this asset outside of super or inside of super because it's going to push me over the $3 million total super balance limit. And then I'm going to be, you know, captured by that net.
Mm.
That heat in that argument has kind of subsided a little bit.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. And I think the difficulty, Darren, and this is kind of opening up soapbox discussion points. But the difficult part is that, we weren't expecting these changes that came through in budget. So it's very difficult for a trustee to plan, for the future, which is exactly what they're supposed to do with their superannuation funds. The
Yeah.
sole purpose is planning for retirement benefits. So we're talking, decades into the future potentially, and, structure everything given the current laws to plan for the future, when you just get whacked with these erroneous changes. And then what do you do? Then you've got to pivot, then you've got to change, and you've got to, it just creates difficulty and uncertainty for the trustees. And I think that's the unfair part of it. So
Yeah, you're 100% right. I must have used this phrase. Well, I can't tell you how many times. I'm not going to say do an Anthony Albanese and say for the 50th time I'm using it. But I know that I use this phrase a lot. As soon as the Division 296 measure was introduced, my question always was, well, you can't, unfortunately, you can start planning, but you can't really jump at shadows,
Yeah, exactly.
which means implementing whatever these strategies might be. And this is a classic case of it because,
Mhm.
you can turn around now and it makes it very difficult. I know we're doing a trustee podcast, but it actually makes it very difficult for the practitioner as well.
Yeah,
Because again, no one sticks their hand up to say that it was purely my responsibility that this happened. So
yeah.
if I moved all of my assets out and I said, but Tracy, when we had that discussion 12 months ago, you said that this was the best thing to do. And now
Mm.
it turns out that it's not, and I can't get that back into the super environment. So guess what? I'm going
It's,
to take action against
it's all
you.
your fault. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
you advised me to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
it just places everything in such a difficult position because, as I said, you can't jump at shadows.
No.
You know that you need to prepare, but a lot of people, again, that whole certainty thing, I want certainty. So I want to know
Yeah.
what path I'm going down.
Yes.
Look at the way the government changes its mind,
Mm.
flips everything on its head
Yeah.
that we knew. I mean, and all of the work that you might have done with the modeling can actually effectively be completely irrelevant now as well.
Yes, exactly.
So it is a
Yeah.
very difficult situation. They don't make life easy for us.
No, they don't. I mean, they give us lots to talk about, Darren, which we're grateful for a podcast.
Yes, they
But
do.
for the
They
purposes of a
do.
podcast, that's good. But you're right, it is difficult. And I've had numerous conversations again just about keeping on track, keeping focused on what's the strategy long term. And you're absolutely right. Don't jump at shadows. Don't just flip and change as soon as an announcement is made, because until we get to the final piece of legislation, and this is what it's going to look like, we just sometimes do not know. And it's really hard as an advisor or an accountant or anyone else giving kind of that guidance and education in the industry when you have to say, actually, I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know how this is going to impact you. I don't know what this is going to look like. It's not because we are not educated and trained and we haven't done our, CPD. It's just because we literally don't know because we haven't seen the final pieces of the puzzle all put together.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to paint that picture when you don't have all of the pieces. So we're still in that position, really. You know.
Now, speaking of I don't know, I thought we'd wind down the podcast with something we do know.
Yes.
And something that we do know is Tracey will be presenting at the SMSF Trustee Empowerment Day, which
Yep.
is happening in October. We're presenting on the 13th of October in Sydney and the 15th of October in Melbourne. And
Yep.
Tracey, you've got some details about what you're going to actually discuss during your
Yes.
session there.
I do, Darren. I'm really looking forward to seeing our listeners and being able to present at both in both Sydney and Melbourne. And my session this year is going to be helping trustees all around kind of keeping their SMSF on track during these uncertain times. So I thought it was kind of timely topic really, and really sharing some of the things that I'm seeing at the coalface, some of the questions I'm being asked, some of the issues that are popping up, and things to be careful of, things to make note of, things to be sure that are on your action list, so that you can keep your SMSF on track during these times of uncertainty, and making sure that we're meeting all of the things that you want to achieve in your SMSF. So that's broadly what my topic is about, Darren. I won't give away too much more, but I've got some really great stories to share.
Well, that's going to be fantastic, Tracey, because if nothing else, it will actually be pointing out potentially some landmines that people have to try and sidestep. Because as
Yes.
I said right at the start of this is an unprecedented time of change, not just for SMSS, in the superannuation and maybe even broader, the financial services sector, which doesn't make any of this easy to navigate because
Yep.
they're all intertwined in a lot of ways. Nothing is isolated to one particular thing. So that makes it very difficult. So I think that's
Yes.
going to be a great session. I won't be missing it, and I don't think you should either. So just go on to the SMSF, the SMS Trustee News website, and you can see all the details. You'll be able to see all the details there of how to register and where the event's being held. And again, 13th and 15th of October in Sydney and Melbourne, respectively. Well, we've actually run out of time as usual, Tracey. I could have talked about this for another 3 or so hours, really. It's that intricate. And thankfully, there's for the listeners and the viewers out there, there's not enough time for me to get on my absolute soapbox about some of these issues. But don't worry, I'll be doing it at the SMSF Trustee Empowerment Day because that is the right forum for it. So, yeah. We've come to an end. So thanks again, Tracey. And great that we've finished our hiatus.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be back, Darren, and really looking forward to seeing you in person as well soon. It's been a
Yeah,
while. So
that,
hopefully it will be before the trustee day, but if not, we'll be on the road together for a little bit so we know.
that'll be great. And thank you again to Superfund Property Valuations for their continued support of these podcasts. Thank you to my team also for putting these podcasts together and making sure that they are published on all of our media channels. But most importantly, thanks to you for listening and for joining us today. We hope we've given you some valuable information, and more importantly, we hope that you've enjoyed these podcasts as much as we enjoy bringing them to you. Until next time, travel safely, and we'll see you next time we're putting together a podcast.
Bye for now.